In this video, I'm gonna do something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and that is to cook a brisket just as I normally would up until the point where I would usually wrap it. But rather than wrap it in butcher paper or foil boat it, I'm gonna finish it off in confit. And if you don't know what that means, it means to cook in rendered fat. So I'm gonna fully submerge my partially cooked brisket in beef fat, beef dripping, tallow, and cook it until it's done. So we're gonna need a brisket. What I've got here is a UK grass-fed brisket from John Davidson's Butchers. If you've watched me cook briskets before, you'll probably be familiar with this. It's my go-to brisket here in the UK. And although I go for these because they're generally pretty good for a grass-fed brisket, they are still a UK grass-fed brisket. So they are naturally leaner than something like a USDA Choice or Prime or Wagyu. So I'm kind of interested to see whether finishing this brisket off in confit is gonna improve the end result. So I'm not gonna do anything different than I normally would with this trim and season. It's gonna be pretty much the same as every other brisket that I cook. And the idea behind doing this really comes from the approach that Leroy and Lewis take with their now world famous confit beef cheeks. They smoke them for a little bit, get a nice bark, then finish them off in a vat of pure beef tallow. And when you confit meats in general, it turns out pretty good. It's kind of like somewhere between deep frying and slow cooking. You're fully submerged in all that fat, which is never going to be a bad thing, but you're still slow cooking, breaking down all that connective tissue. So that's not looking too bad. Trimmed up, apart from these scalps that were there straight out the packet. Looking nice and rounded, nothing hanging off. So we'll season this up. So as usual on the seasoning, I'm gonna go 2 parts pepper to 1 part salt, using the dump method where you throw the whole piece of meat into a big vat of seasoning. And that's gonna be the Kirkland brand from Costco black pepper. 2, and then 1 Diamond Crystal Kosher salt. There'll be a link to both of these things in the description. Make sure that's nice and evenly distributed. We'll go in with our brisket. Let any excess fall off. Now this can just go onto a wire rack and go sit in the fridge for a couple of hours for no other reason other than I'm not ready to cook it yet. So I'm gonna be cooking this on the pellet grill overnight, and it's a little bit too early to get it started. So it's gonna go into the fridge just to hang out. And the only reason I'm using a pellet grill is because I only have 2 barbecues that will fit the deep hotel pan that I'm gonna be using to confit this brisket when it comes to it. And that's my offset and the pellet grill. And I don't have time to manage the offset fire. So pellet grill it is. So this will go into the fridge for a couple of hours before we get the pellet grill fired up. Couple of hours later, this is ready to go on the pit. So the approach to cooking this is gonna be the same as I've done in many other videos when I'm cooking a brisket on the pellet grill. I'm gonna cook it very low and slow and very smoky for the first couple of hours, try and build up some good color, good smoke flavor, and good bark before I push the temperatures up to start actually cooking it. So I'm gonna set the pellet grill to 165 Fahrenheit. That's the lowest my pellet grill goes. And I'm gonna fill a smoke tube full of pellets, light that up at one end, let it catch for a little bit, and then blow it out. That's going to provide some good smoke for about 4 to 5 hours. So it's about 8 p.m. right now. This is ready to go on. But before this does go on, I'm going to hit it with another layer of seasoning. And that's just going to be my basic homemade seasoned salt. You can watch how I make this seasoned salt here, or you could just use something like Lowry's. And this is something that I would do regardless of whether I was confitting this brisket or not. That additional layer of table salt based rub is really going to give a bit of a pop of flavor to this brisket. But for this cook, this is especially important. As you know, I'm going to be submerging this completely in rendered fat. And when it comes to seasoned meat and fat, the more fat you add, the more fat there is to coat your tongue, the less salt you're going to taste. So actually, I'm going to go over and above what I would normally add. Just go down with a pretty heavy layer just over the fat cap. And I'm really not too concerned about over salting this thing. Gonna let that sit for a little bit. Then we're gonna take this outside, put it on the pellet grill, let it smoke low and slow with that smoke tube for a couple of hours. And then around midnight tonight, I'm gonna pump the temperatures up to around 250 Fahrenheit. It's gonna cook there pretty much all night until I wake up in the morning, at which point it may or may not be ready to either wrap or, in this case, put it in confit. So it is the next morning, and this brisket has been running since about midnight last night at around 250 Fahrenheit. Looking pretty good, about as dark as it's going to get on this pellet grill. And we've got a big vat of rendered beef fat down there. The fat's looking nice and rendered. So we'll take this inside and get this prepped up for its tallow bath. So this brisket is looking pretty good. This is the point where I would usually foil boat the brisket, or wrap the brisket in butcher paper. But obviously we're going to submerge this in beef fat and confit it until it's finished. So I could just chuck this into the confit and cook it, then estimate how much time I think it's going to be before it's done. And then I can go in and just start probing it just like I do if I was wrapping the brisket or cooking the brisket unwrapped. submerged, but I want to cover this pan in foil. I really don't want to have to keep going into the confit, pulling the brisket out, probing it. So I'm going to be using the Chef's Temp Pro Temp 2 Plus Smart Thermometer. This thing is Chef's Temp's new wireless thermometer. It's got a really tiny little needle-sized probe on it, super thin. So I'm going to be inserting this into the part of the brisket that usually finishes last for me. And that is going to be right in the middle of the flat. So the technology that Chef's Temp have used on this means that this can be fully submerged in the fat and it's not going to damage it or anything like that. And not only is it going to tell me the temperature of inside the meat, this tip part here is going to let me know what the temperature of the fat is as well, which will obviously be useful. I want the fat to be cooking at around 250 Fahrenheit, and the temperature I've set on the pellet grill might not transfer directly to the fat. So knowing what that fat temperature is going to be ideal. And this thing's pretty cool as well. You could put this into a big steak and cook it directly over screaming hot coals. This thing is safe to cook up to 1000 degrees Fahrenheit, so you don't have to worry about damaging it. So what I'm going to do is set a target temperature on my phone, and that's going to be 195 Fahrenheit. For me, that's generally when I start thinking about briskets being done. So I'm going to set an alarm to go off when it gets there. And because I'm cooking on an automated cooker, the pellet grill, and the fact that this thing is Wi-Fi enabled means I can go absolutely anywhere in the world, and this is still going to be connected. So I can go on about my day whilst this finishes up. Unlike some other brands where you have to get an iPad to boost the signal and just constantly deal with signal failure. This thing is very reliable, as are all the Chef's Temp products. So I definitely recommend you click the link in the description below, use my discount code to save yourself some money and pick up some of their cool gear. So I've got my probe in my brisket. Let's take this out and put this into confit. So we'll just get that in there. Hopefully it's fully submerged. Mostly, but I think that'll be fine. Get that sealed up nicely. Shut that down, keep cooking around 250 Fahrenheit. A few hours later, my Pro Temp 2 Plus has told me on my phone that the internal of this brisket has reached 195 Fahrenheit. So in pretty much every other scenario, I wouldn't ever take a brisket off purely going on temp, but I'm gonna take my chances on this one. My thinking is, if I pull it out at 195, there's a huge amount of residual heat in this rendered fat. The pan is really hot, but more importantly, the fat inside is still reading around 240. So I'm gonna let this continue to cook and carry over to somewhere in the 200s, hopefully not too much, but then start dropping down in temperature. Then we'll pull it out and slice it up when it hits around 145, 150, something like that. If it carries over too far and for too long, I'll probably pull it out, but if everything goes well, I'll leave it in here until it's cool enough to slice into. About 3 hours later, this brisket carried over to 206 Fahrenheit. It eventually came down and now it's at about 150. I can't wait anymore. I really want to get into this. And it's not looking too bad. Fat is nice and rendered. I can see some of this seasoning has washed off a little bit, which is a bit annoying, but I'm sure it will be good. It's crazy how much heat this is held on to 3 hours later and it's still hot. Get a little bit of that rendered fat over the top there. That looks ridiculous. You know what, I'm really not looking forward to the cleanup of this. There's a lot of fat and I know it's gonna end up on my porcelain floor. Just pulling out the Pro Temp 2 Plus, that has done its job. Thank you, Chef's Temp. Slice into it. That is definitely juicy. So I definitely think that there's an element of the fat that's on top has gone down between the cut. Lots of juice, huge amount of juice. Let's take this burnt end. Oh wow, that is looking good. Not been dipped in fat, that is straight on a fresh cut. You can see all that muscle structure still intact, haven't completely rendered out all the connective tissue and fat, which is good. Not covered or rested in fat, that is just a fresh cut of meat, really nice and shiny. Once again, nice fat content in the XM Gold. That is a great slice of point end there. It's definitely juicy. Kind of hard to tell whether it's just the fact that it's literally been sat in fat or whether the confit has made a difference to the overall cook. Give this little burnt end a taste. Real nice dark bark, glossy bark. Definitely different. The salt level's still there. That's still a perfectly seasoned brisket. I thought that the fat would wash away more of the salt and therefore more of the salt flavor than it actually has. Texture-wise, it's not that much different from a normal brisket, but what I don't know is whether this was a really well marbled brisket paired with the fact that I cooked it really well, or did the confit bath make it better than the average brisket that I cook? I don't really know actually. I've taken a couple of extra slices, tried to make sure that I'm not letting them fall into the insane amount of fat that's on my board, and they're still just insanely juicy. That's the flat muscle, that's the fresh cut. and it's still just glistening. Super, super tender, just falls apart. That is the best flat I've cooked on an XM Gold brisket, a UK grass-fed brisket. There's not a single part of that that's even close to being dry. But yeah, the biggest takeaway for this is just how well cooked it is. I really thought I was gonna overshoot it, leaving it sat in a hot bath of fat. I'm gonna take a little slice off the very tip of the flat, make sure it's not covered in fat, and see what that first slice on the tip looks like. First slice of the tip, you can see just how juicy it is. It is almost like the confit just prevented any fat from coming out of this and just kept it all in. Normally one of the driest points in my experience. Did get a bit of that classic bottom up cooking, shredding on the bottom of the flat, but I mean, it's not dried out. That is very good. Pretty much hits where you want a brisket to hit on every level, with the exception of the very subtle smoke flavor compared to cooking on an offset. The bark's there, the salt level's there, the juiciness is there, the tenderness is there. Overall quality of the cook is not over, it's not under. The flat is juicy all the way through, right up until the tip. So yeah, I'm actually quite surprised by that. I was half expecting it to be like a normal brisket finished in butcher paper foil or foil boat, and then taste like it had just been plastered with a load of rendered fat at the end. But it definitely had different qualities from just a regular brisket that had been covered in beef fat. It's not that I didn't expect it to be good, because anytime you smoke a good piece of meat and finish it off in a bath of its own fat, it's gonna be good. But it kind of felt like that brisket was perfect. And yeah, it was an experiment that I'm glad I did. Would I recommend that you do it? I think if you've got the space, the facilities, the equipment, a huge amount of rendered beef fat, it's definitely worth doing as a bit of an experiment or a bit of fun. I personally probably won't ever do it again, unless I just want to do it for fun. But yeah, absolutely great outcome, and that's really all that matters. So before I finish up, firstly, a big shout out to all my channel members. You support me every month, not only by watching the videos and liking and commenting, but also by contributing a small amount that helps me to make videos like this. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, doing all that kind of stuff. And also remember to make use of the discount code below for the Chef's Temp products. Highly recommend them. They definitely serve me well in this cook. So yeah, save yourself some money by using the discount code. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next week for another video.